I never thought a single locked door would divide my life into a before and an after. For years, I hid a secret so small it fit inside a cardboard box, yet so powerful it changed the way I saw myself forever. Every Friday night, while everyone else believed I was asleep, I became someone I had never dared to meet. I wasn't chasing attention. I wasn't trying to fool anyone. I was searching for a version of myself that only one silent mirror had ever seen. But secrets don't stay hidden forever, and the night someone almost opened that bedroom door, everything changed. I never thought a single locked door would divide my life into a before and an after. For years, I hid a secret so small it fit inside a cardboard box, yet so powerful it completely changed the way I saw myself. Every Friday night, while everyone else believed I was asleep, I became someone I had never dared to meet. I wasn't trying to impress anyone. I wasn't trying to fool anyone. I was simply searching for a version of myself that only one silent mirror had ever known. But secrets never stay hidden forever, and the night someone almost opened that bedroom door, my carefully built world began to change. My name is Ethan, and if you had met me back then, you would have described me with one word: ordinary. I was the quiet guy who always arrived early, finished his work on time, and rarely spoke unless someone asked a question. At university, I blended into every crowd without trying. I wasn't the loudest, the funniest, or the most confident person in the room. I had mastered something else instead: disappearing. People often mistake being unnoticed for being comfortable. They're not the same thing. The truth was that I had spent years hiding behind normality because it felt safer than explaining thoughts I barely understood myself. Ever since I was a child, certain things quietly caught my attention. It wasn't about fashion trends or looking different. It was the calmness I felt when I noticed flowing fabrics, soft colors, and elegant silhouettes. They seemed peaceful in a way I could never explain. Whenever my mom folded laundry, I'd notice the different textures without saying a word. Whenever I walked past clothing shops, my eyes lingered for a second longer than they probably should have. Then guilt would arrive almost immediately, reminding me to look away before anyone noticed. I became incredibly good at convincing myself those feelings would eventually disappear. They never did. Instead, they grew quietly, year after year, like a song playing somewhere in another room. Always distant enough to ignore, yet always impossible to completely forget. By the time I turned 22, I had become an expert at living two completely separate lives. There was the version everyone knew: jeans, hoodies, plain trainers, a quiet smile, predictable routines. Then there was another version that existed only inside my imagination. That second version never asked for attention, only honesty. One evening, after weeks of debating with myself, I did something that made my hands shake more than any exam ever had. I opened an online shopping website. My finger hovered over the keyboard for nearly 10 minutes before I even typed anything. Every click felt impossibly loud. I deleted my search history 3 separate times before actually placing an order. A simple cream cardigan, a navy pleated skirt, black tights, comfortable ballet flats. Nothing flashy. Nothing expensive, just simple clothes that somehow carried years of unanswered questions. When I finally pressed confirm order, I immediately regretted it. What have I done? For the next 5 days, every sound outside the house made my heart race. Then, on a quiet Wednesday afternoon, the delivery finally arrived. I had carefully planned everything. Mom was at work. Dad wouldn't be home for hours. The courier placed the small cardboard box beside the front door, smiled politely, and left without knowing he'd just delivered the biggest emotional moment of my life. I picked it up carefully, almost respectfully, and carried it upstairs as though someone might suddenly stop me. The box wasn't heavy, but emotionally, it felt enormous. I pushed it to the very back of my wardrobe without opening it, not because I had changed my mind, because suddenly, the dream had become real. Looking at that unopened package every morning became strangely emotional. Some days I almost opened it. Other days I convinced myself I should throw it away. The unopened box slowly became a symbol of everything I had been afraid to face. Weeks passed. Every time I reached for a jacket, I caught sight of it waiting quietly behind the coats. Never demanding, never judging, simply waiting, almost as though it knew I wasn't ready yet. Then came the rain. It was a Friday evening, and the entire house seemed wrapped in silence. Rain tapped softly against the windows while distant thunder rolled across the sky. For reasons I still can't explain, something inside me finally whispered, "Enough hiding." I walked to my wardrobe, pulled the box forward, sat cross-legged on the floor, and slowly lifted the lid. The faint scent of fresh fabric escaped into the room. I stared at each folded item for what felt like forever. I wasn't looking at clothes. I was looking at years of unanswered questions folded neatly inside tissue paper. Then my eyes drifted toward the mirror standing across the room. It reflected exactly what everyone else already knew. A quiet young man. Simple clothes. Messy hair. Nothing unusual. But for the first time, I wondered if the mirror had been waiting just as patiently as the unopened box. And that single thought made my heart beat louder than the rain outside. For several long moments, I couldn't move. The room was completely silent except for the rain brushing against the window, yet my heartbeat seemed loud enough to fill every corner of it. I reached toward the cardigan, stopped halfway, pulled my hand back, then laughed quietly at myself. "No one's even watching," I whispered. It was strange how years of imagined judgment could still feel real, even when I was completely alone. Taking a slow breath, I unfolded the cardigan first. The fabric felt softer than I had imagined. It wasn't magical. It wasn't life-changing because of what it was. It was life-changing because I had finally allowed myself to hold it without guilt. Next came the skirt. I smiled nervously. This is really happening. After locking my bedroom door one more time and checking the handle twice, I changed slowly, almost ceremonially. Every movement felt deliberate, not because I was trying to become someone different, but because I wanted to remember this moment exactly as it happened. The tights were unfamiliar. The skirt felt surprisingly natural. The cardigan rested gently on my shoulders. When I finally stood upright, I instinctively looked down before looking into the mirror. Then I lifted my eyes. The reflection staring back wasn't perfect. My hair was still messy. My posture was awkward. My expression carried years of uncertainty. Yet something had changed. For the first time in a very long time, I wasn't looking at someone trying to meet everyone else's expectations. I was looking at someone who had finally stopped running. A quiet smile appeared without permission. It wasn't excitement. It wasn't relief alone. It was recognition. Almost as if the mirror had been waiting all these years to introduce me to someone I already knew deep inside. That mirror soon became part of a ritual. Every Friday evening, after the house grew quiet, I would lock my bedroom door, close the curtains, and spend an hour simply existing without pretending. Sometimes I read books. Sometimes I listened to gentle piano music. Sometimes I simply sat by the window, watching the rain. The clothes themselves slowly became less important. What mattered was the feeling. Peace. For years, I had assumed confidence meant standing out. Instead, I discovered confidence sometimes begins in complete silence. Outside my room, nothing changed. I still attended lectures, still met friends for coffee, still smiled when people joked around. Nobody suspected that every Friday, I quietly reclaimed a small piece of myself. But hiding a secret has a cost. The bigger the secret became, the heavier it felt. Every unexpected knock on my bedroom door made me jump. Every family member walking down the hallway made me instinctively pause. Every creak in the floorboard sent my heart racing. One Saturday morning, everything nearly fell apart. I had finished folding the clothes and was placing them back into the cardboard box when I heard footsteps approaching my room.
Mom.
She knocked gently.
Ethan?
"Are you awake?" My stomach dropped. The box was still open on the bed. The cardigan lay across the blanket. For a split second, panic took over. I gathered everything as quickly as I could, stuffing the clothes into the wardrobe just as she tried the handle. "It's locked," she said with a puzzled laugh. "Everything okay?" My voice almost cracked.
Yeah.
"Just changing." There was a brief silence. Then she replied, Take your time. Breakfast's ready downstairs." Her footsteps faded. Only then did I realize I had been holding my breath. I sank onto the floor, my hands shaking. That close. One ordinary Saturday morning had nearly exposed everything. For the rest of the day, I couldn't concentrate on anything. The fear stayed with me. At dinner, I kept wondering if she had noticed something unusual in my voice. Had I sounded nervous? Had she become suspicious? Every smile from my parents suddenly felt like a question I couldn't answer. That night, I stood in front of the mirror again. But this time, I didn't change clothes. I simply stared at my reflection. The mirror looked exactly the same. Yet somehow, it was asking me a different question. How long can you keep living in two separate worlds? I didn't have an answer. Over the following weeks, another change happened, one I never expected. Instead of seeing the mirror as a hiding place, I started seeing it as a teacher. It showed me confidence wasn't built by pretending. It was built by accepting. Little by little, I stopped criticizing every detail about myself. I stood taller. I smiled more naturally. Even classmates began commenting that I seemed happier lately. "You've changed," one friend told me after class. "You seem lighter somehow." I almost laughed. If only they knew. The biggest transformation wasn't hanging inside my wardrobe. It was happening inside my heart. But just as I began believing I could keep balancing both worlds forever, one unexpected invitation from my closest friend forced me to make a decision I had never imagined facing. And for the first time, keeping my secret no longer felt entirely possible. The invitation looked ordinary enough. "Everyone's coming on Saturday. Don't make excuses this time." It was from Liam, my closest friend since secondary school. He'd been asking me for weeks to join a small get-together at his flat. Normally, I would have said yes without thinking. This time, I stared at the message for almost an hour. Not because I didn't want to go, because somewhere along the way, I'd become exhausted from switching between two versions of myself. On Friday evenings, behind my locked bedroom door, I felt calm. By Saturday morning, I was back to performing. The contrast had become impossible to ignore. I accepted the invitation. That Saturday, I laughed with friends, played board games, and listened to everyone talk about work, holidays, and future plans. From the outside, everything looked perfectly normal. Then Liam suddenly smiled. "You know," he said, "you've changed these last few months." I froze. "What do you mean?" "You seem happier, more confident." Someone else nodded. "I noticed that too." Another friend added, "Whatever you're doing, keep doing it." I smiled, but inside, my emotions tangled together. If only they knew the reason. For the first time, I realized something surprising. The confidence they noticed wasn't fake. It hadn't come from changing how I looked. It had come from finally allowing myself to stop arguing with myself. That thought stayed with me all the way home. That evening, I stood in front of the mirror again. The familiar cardigan rested over my shoulders. The navy skirt moved gently as I shifted my weight. The mirror, the same mirror that had once reflected only fear, now reflected someone who no longer looked away after a few seconds. I held my own gaze. "I know you," I whispered. It wasn't directed at a different person. It was directed at me. The mirror had become more than glass. At first, it reflected secrecy, then honesty. Now, it reflected acceptance. Weeks turned into months. I became more organized, more relaxed, and strangely more patient with everyone around me. The anxiety that had followed me for years slowly lost its grip. One evening, Mom knocked softly before entering my room. "Ethan?" "Yeah." She looked around, smiling warmly. "You've seemed happier lately." I smiled. "I think I am." She nodded. "I don't know what's changed, but I'm glad to see you smiling more." After she left, I sat quietly on the edge of my bed. Her words echoed in my mind. She hadn't asked difficult questions. She hadn't demanded explanations. She had simply noticed happiness. Sometimes we imagine rejection so vividly that we forget many people first notice something much simpler.
Joy.
Life continued. My secret remained private, but it no longer felt like a burden I carried every waking moment. Instead of seeing it as something shameful, I began seeing it as a deeply personal part of my journey, one that had taught me patience, empathy, and the courage to be honest with myself. I also learned something unexpected. Clothing had never been the destination. It had only been the doorway. Beyond that doorway was confidence, self-understanding, kindness toward the frightened version of myself who had once hidden a tiny cardboard box at the back of a wardrobe. One rainy evening, almost exactly a year after I had first opened that box, I stood before the mirror again. The rain sounded exactly the same. The room looked almost unchanged. But I wasn't the same person. I smiled at my reflection, not because everything in life had become easy, but because I no longer believed I had to earn the right to be myself. I carefully folded the cardigan, the skirt, and the tights, placing them back into the same cardboard box. Only this time, I didn't push it to the darkest corner of the wardrobe. Instead, I placed it neatly on the highest shelf where I could reach it without hiding it from myself. It was a small gesture, but it meant everything, because the box no longer represented fear. It represented the night I finally chose honesty over pretending. Sometimes people ask when my secret crossdressing life truly began. They expect me to mention the first outfit, or the first online order, or the first time I stood before the mirror. But they're all wrong. It began the moment I stopped seeing my reflection as someone to judge and started seeing it as someone worth accepting. That quiet mirror never changed.
I did.